doesn't love a blockbuster movie? Especially a blockbuster action-y movie. But just because you're making a movie that you think is going to be the next summer blockbuster, you don't automatically have to invest millions into a toy line for it. Nonetheless, there have been tons of examples of movies that shouldn't have gotten toy lines getting toy lines. And this is the top 10 hilariously bad movie toy lines that nobody wanted. What's up, everybody? My name is Matt, sometimes called Big Nerdy. Together we are the NWO. It's right side up this time. And this is Nerdzoic. Dorks, geeks, nerds, how you guys doing? Welcome to another video. Today we're looking back at movies that didn't need a toy line. Now, like I said, there's countless examples of this, but we looked at the very, very worst. And I think you're gonna have some very sad memories of things that you saw warming the pegs and never even wanted. Like seriously, these things actually hurt the toy industry, so it actually isn't a good thing, but it's fun to laugh. Before we get to the top 10, hit the pause button and go on down to the comments and let me know, what do you think the absolutely worst excuse for a toy line based on a movie of all time is? And then let us know how you did. Did you hit number 1? Did you even make it into the top 10? Let's find out. Coming in at number 10 is Last Action Hero. This came out in 1993, grossed about $50 million, and scores a 40% on the Rotten Tomato meter. These figures were made by Mattel, and I guess they assumed if you put Arnold in plastic, people are gonna buy it, but no, he won't be back. In fact, these toys look suspiciously similar to the Terminator 2 Kenner figures from this time frame. All in all though, they're not terrible looking for the time, but it's just an odd movie to come out with a toy line for. I remember watching this movie and thinking, this is too deep for me. I just wanted to see crap blow up. Over the years, the movie's gained a bit of a cult following, but it is sort of a spoof of a movie to which a toy line doesn't really make much sense. Like seriously, it is too much of a think piece with the toys. Jack Slater is a character in a movie about his movies that you want to make a toy line for. It's like Inception. Also, that Jack Slater in a trench coat figure, yeah, that looks like the action figure version of a flasher. I could totally see this line working better today if a company like, say, NECA was to go out and put a Jack Slater figure out, kind of the way they do with the Back to the Future toys, with the whole fold-out cover and ultimate treatment. I could actually see that working as like a one-off, but as a toy line aimed at kids, nah. Especially considering the fact that it was competing in the toy store and the box office with Jurassic Park. Good luck. You just got Velociraptor. To quote Arnold in the movie, to be or not to be, not to be. You just been erased. I know that's Eraser. I like that movie too. Coming in at number 9 is Little Nicky, which came out in the year 2000, grossed $58 million worldwide, and scored just a 21% on the tomato meter. I hate to say this, but I love this movie. I went to the movies to see this multiple times. Like, a percentage of that 58 million is Big Nerdy and John, okay? Sorry about that. I especially like the part where they go, "Get the bees on Henry Winkler." That's great stuff. After Big Daddy, Billy Madison, and Happy Gilmore, you'd think that Adam Sandler could do no wrong, but apparently the general public begs to differ. The toys were made by McFarlane because McFarlane would literally bid on any license about this time. Hey, you guys gonna have toys? I'll make them. Like, that's pretty much how it went. And while the movie wasn't, like, good, obviously, except for me who loved it, the toy line was kind of interesting, actually. It was almost ahead of its time. Fun play feature, though. The Mr. Beefy dog accessory can be filled with water and made to look like he's peeing. That's a plus. At the end of the day, this was a very strange adult-oriented toy for a very random Adam Sandler comedy. It just doesn't make sense to have a toy line for a C-rated movie like this. I mean, this is not a blockbuster, but it had to make the list. Coming in at number 8 is the Flintstones, which came out in 1994, grossed $358 million at the box office, and scored a whopping 20% on the tomato meter. Listen, these figures are just plain creepy. Like, the heads are huge, the bodies are short and stubby. Maybe they were going for their own spin on the Playmate style. Like, no, this just doesn't work. Although it was nice to get a John Goodman toy, this is not the John Goodman toy I had in mind. Could have gotten Dan Connor, we could have gotten King Ralph, we could have gotten someone else that I can't think of at the moment, but there's other options for a John Goodman figure. This came out at about the time that Ted Turner created Cartoon Network and started airing reruns of the Flintstones, and they may have been better served to actually make the toy line of the cartoon rather than the movies, because this was a bust. Coming in at number 7 is Demolition Man, which came out in 1993, grossed $159 million and scored a 62% on the tomato meter. Out of all the movies on this list, this is actually the third highest rated as far as the Rotten Tomatoes scoring goes. I'd also go so far as to say it's one of the better sci-fi-ish movies of the 90s. The toys were made by Mattel, and they were pretty good for the time, I suppose. They remind you a lot of the Marvel DC stuff that was coming out around the same time in the early 90s. The problem here is the IP. What kid is going to want a figure from a Demolition Man movie? This is an R-rated movie in an era where collectibles were focused at kids, not grown-ups. So this was doomed from the beginning. Great job, Mattel. This is another line that would actually do really well if NECA were to pick up the license and come out with a new Sylvester Stallone and a Wesley Snipes from the movie. Maybe throw in a... who's the woman? Sandra Bullock. Throw in a Sandra Bullock. I'm thinking Speed, but the other Sandra Bullock movie from the early 90s. Coming in at number 6 is the Coneheads. Released in 1993 and grossing just $21 million, this scored a 35% on the Rotten Tomato meter. These figures were made by Playmates, and at the time, they were coming off the high that is Ninja Turtles, and they were just grasping for straws pretty obviously, because this is not something that I would think of and say, that can replace the Turtles, get the Coneheads! What are you thinking? I mean, the Coneheads first appeared on Saturday Night Live back in 1977, so it's kind of weird that it took 15 years for a movie to get made. It's even weirder that after those 15 years, someone said, they need toys. During this time period, there are quite a few reoccurring skits from SNL that got turned into movies. Wayne's World, Night at the Roxbury, Ladies Man. But this one, how did they choose to make toys for this one? I gotta say though, the toys look fairly detailed for the time they came out. Hell, they even come with stands! And I'm particularly fond of the packaging. They look like Conehead. Conehead, get it? It's funny. Coming in at number 5 is Starship Troopers. This came out in 1997, grossed a whopping $121 million worldwide, and scored a 66% on the Rotten Tomato meter, making this the second highest rated movie on this entire countdown. This is another sci-fi cult classic, and it's based on a novel from the 1950s. The toys themselves were made by Galuba Micro Machine, but they had a terrible likeness to the actors. That said, the ships and the bugs actually fetch a pretty penny on the aftermarket these days. Now you might think this is a good idea for a toy line like, hey, look how Star Wars did, but this is an R-rated movie, and again, not a ton of collector adults buying toys back then. If these were made today, they would probably do pretty well as long as they're articulated well and have a lot of details, but these were made at a time that they were meant for kids, not meant to be played with and displayed by adults, and they were kind of cheap looking. The idea of the toy line was actually ahead of its time, and a great example of that is the Hot Toy figure of the team leader that's out today. The fact that Hot Toys decided to pay for that license, a toy company that is very smart, just tells you there's a lot of demand for it. But sorry guys, you were about 25 years too early. Coming in at number 4 is Kevin Costner's Waterworld, which came out in 1995, grossed a whopping $264 million, and scored a 46% on the Rotten Tomato meter. The toys were made by Kenner, and they're very similar to the Star Wars Power of the Force 2 figures that were coming out around the same time by Kenner. For example, 5 points of articulation, and they all had that bulkier than normal looking upper body like Luke in the orange card. The detail and sculpts of these figures and accessories are actually pretty good and made sense for the time. Unfortunately, the movie had some bad press and was incredibly expensive with a budget of $175 million. Because of this, and despite the high expectations, the movie was just unlikely to be a hit, and so were the toys. Coming in at number 3 is Wild Wild West, which came out in 1999, grossed $222 million worldwide, and scored a 16% on the Rotten Tomato meter. I gotta say that starring in this movie is probably the most controversial thing that Will Smith has ever done. Ooh. Except for that, sorry Chris Rock. These toys were made by a company called X-Toys, which I've never heard of, which is not good for their longevity, and surprisingly, Will Smith's likeness in his figure isn't too bad, especially for the time. He comes with a full-scale 8-ball that makes an exploding sound when you press a button on it, which is kind of an odd accessory. In all, the line had 7 figures and 2 vehicles, so it wasn't exactly a super small line, so they obviously had big plans for it. It just flopped. I will give them this though, the marketing for this movie could not have been any better. Will Smith wrote the song himself, and it's still stuck in my head 25 years later. Wild Wild West. Wild Wild West. I even remember Burger King had Wild Wild West toys for their Happy Meal. What? Happy Meal's copyrighted? What do they call it? A kid's meal? That's boring. Come up with something better. We're getting to the nitty gritty here. Did your choice show up yet? Or is it still to come? Let's go to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is the abysmal Battlefield Earth, which came out in 1999, only made $30 million at the box office, and scored a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's really bad. The toys were made by Trendmasters, which I've not heard of again, and again, that's not good. The movie itself is based on a novel written in 1982 by L. Ron Hubbard, which is the father of Scientology, so yeah, that's not helping its case. This movie was a colossal flop, and so were the toys. These things are really ugly too, like why are their hands so damn big? These things make Dumbledore's hands look like Jared Goff's. Despite the movie being a flop, there's no excuse for these toys being as ugly as they were, especially considering some of the other figures that were out at the time. The technology was there. Do better, company I've never heard of and will never hear of again. Forrest Whitaker's character on his packaging, one of the listed accessories is a dead rat. Does that seem like a good idea? He's not the Rat King. I will say this though, John Travolta looks good in dreadlocks, but I think he looks even better bald. You see this? My twin right there. Here comes our last movie, and it is the newest movie on the list. It is the most critically acclaimed movie on the list, and it is the highest grossing movie on the list. Any guesses who it could be? Let's find out. Coming in at number 1 is Django Unchained. This movie came out in 2012, grossed $425 million, and scored an 86% on the Rotten Tomato meter. A Quentin Tarantino movie about slavery needed toys? Bad idea. This was highly controversial and boycotted all over, so yeah, this was a fail. Not to mention the fact that the Jamie Foxx figure doesn't look like Jamie Foxx. Can't we go back and do some other Quentin Tarantino movies? Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Inglourious Bastards. Let's get figures of those and leave this on the cutting room floor or the sculpting room floor. I don't know what NECA was thinking agreeing to make these toys, but they have to be the most WTF figures of all time. Or are they? You're gonna have to watch this video here to find out. And until next time, remember, you gotta get old, but you don't have to grow up. Just be cool and stay nerdy. Later.